emitter object. We have to create an event emitter object, the process I showed you. After that, we have to bind event and event handler. We have to bind the event and event handler. So, and we have to fire the event, fire event. These are the stages actually. We have to import, we have to create event emitter, we have to bind the event, and we have to fire that event. These are the steps we need to follow. Actually, so we configured that connection is successful. So here connected with API. After that means first step imported, created an object, and we configured an event handler actually. This is handler. Connect with API. So that is an handler. So for your clear understanding sake, because so many variable names are there, I will give the name as connect API handler. Handler. That is the name I am giving. This is the handler, and this is the event managed by that handler. That means this is the function, and this is the handler for that particular function. Handler means the memory allocated for that particular function. So that through that handler, you can access the memory and you can use it. You can use it. So this is the option we configured. So that means we have defined this. Okay, this is one handler is created. That handler name is connect API handler, and the event name is connected. Okay. Next step is we have to bind this with the event emitter. We have to bind this with the event emitter. So the function name, that is the event name, you given as, the event name is given as connected. That is the event name. Now what we have to do is, we have to bind that event handler, this event handler, to a particular event. So that means we have to define a event emitter dot, we have a method called on. This on method is expecting the event name. What should be the name? The event name, function name is connected. You can define an event name, you can change it, or you can define the same name, connected. Or I have defined as suppose connection. And this have to handle which handler? It should handle the connect with, should handle. That means actually function name is connected, but now it is converted into an event. So that event name is connection event. On that connection event, it will handle this handler. It is going to execute this functionality. So after creating the event, that means you are here creating a handler. After creating a handler, you have to create an event for handler. And the event name is connection. That is the event name. After creating event for the handler, now we have to define an emitter which will execute successfully. That means we need to create another event. We need to configure an event which says that the data received from the API, data received from the API by using a function. So we can use event emitter dot on, and we can use an event name. Event name I given as, suppose, fetched data. Fetched data. That is the name. Fetched data, that is from API. And this should use a callback function. Use a callback function. In this callback function, so what we have to configure? In this callback function, a message console.log. We need to define the message is photos fetched from NASA Mars API successfully. That is the point we need to configure. Now fetched data is an event. I want this event to fire up automatically when the connection is successful. After connection is successful, if you want any specific functionality to fire up, you have to define event emitter.emit. Emit which event name? We have to define fetched data, that is the event name. It will fire up this functionality. Now what happens is, this is what generally it uses asynchronous technique. Asynchronous technique, that means it is going to execute everything asynchronously. Now here, so I am defining event emitter.emit. This function also should emit. This function also should emit. That is, connection also should emit. That means we have to define the emit connection. That means it will execute this connection. Emit is used to execute the connection. Now what happens when event emitter is going to emit the connection? Connection is handling this API connection handler. That means it will execute this function. In that function, it will show the message connected with NASA API. After that, it executes this event. That event is going to fire up this functionality and receive data from API and return the data to you. So this will happen when you start the connection, when you configure the connection. Here, events are configured and events are looped. The event configuration and the event looping technique is used here. Looping is nothing but, so we are calling an event inside another event, defining an event inside another event. So it is going to handle the functionality. So this event mechanism is very much required to configure to handle various interactions. Actually, JavaScript events also work in a similar way, but there we don't build events. We are just using events. We are not creating any custom events. In JavaScript also, the custom events are created. And when they are created, the custom events are managed by using this event emitter only. So generally, this event emitter is going to configure an event. That event is used to perform specific functionality. So usually event requires an event handler. Already in JavaScript events basic, I told you. You all people remember that. What is event handler? So those points we detailedly discussed. And what are the various types of browser events available. Now this is handling the events and looping the events. So this is a simple basic point here. For example, see here, when I compile and run this, when you configure and run this, you can see, let's compile this program, cd server and node demo.js. It should execute this method. connected with NASA API, photo fetched from NASA Mars API successfully. And after that, we can configure. Suppose I am configuring another event here, event emitter dot on. So here we say disconnect, and it is using a callback function, and console.log we are displaying disconnected. So with NASA API, that is the message we are configuring. So this is the way of creating events. You are creating events. One event is directly you are creating events without any handler. The first event we created with the help of handler. Other events also you can create with the help of handler. If you create other events with the help of handler, then you have to write like this. But I am directly configuring like this, event emitter.on. So disconnect is the event. Now what we are doing is here, I am using event emitter.emit. So disconnect, that is the option I configured. That means whenever the connection event is executed, what will happen? Connection is going to connect with API, fetch data from API, and disconnect. It is going to perform these operations. So it is going to say disconnect with NASA API. So how you configure your APIs? Actually, in this, we will write the functionality. I just written the message. Now later we can write the functionality. Functionality means connecting with API, fetching the data from API, returning the data. All such things we can write in this events now. So first we have to know how the events are written. Then we have to know how the events are configured and handled. Actually, event handler, two techniques are there. Directly you configure the event. So, or you write a handler and define through the handler. And to execute any event, you need an emit method. So that means I will show you in a more simple point. Nothing complex here, because here I am showing you both techniques, event handler technique and event technique. So this is an example here. So let's create a simple process, actually, very simple process. Actually, you have to first import events. Okay. After importing the events, next step, what you have to do is, after importing the events, we have to create event emitter. So event emitter is derived from, so events dot event emitter base class. You have to create an object for that. After that, we can write some events. We can configure some events. So the event I am writing like event emitter dot on. And what is the event name? We need to define the event name. Suppose connect is the event. What functionality you want? You can define the functionality. So console.log. So connects with the API, or say connect with database. Okay. I will write here MongoDB database. Later we will write the logic there. This is an event for connecting. Another event emitter dot on. This is fetch. So this is an event which is used for fetch data from console.log. Here we will say fetch data from so MongoDB database collection, fetch data from MongoDB database collection. So after that, event emitter dot on. So we have disconnect. So this uses a function and this console.log, and it defines, so disconnect with the database, disconnect with MongoDB database, disconnect MongoDB database. So that is just some message I defined. Actually, now how many events are configured here? We are configuring 3 events. And you don't need to define. So you don't need to define the handler every time. Handler is required when you want to store them and use in later stage. You can directly configure the events here. Yes. And if you want to execute this, that means here event loop, how it works is after connecting. In the connection event, I want to call, so event emitter.emit, I want to call fetch. After that, event emitter.emit, I want to call disconnect. That's how we are defining the events. So it is going to access these events, execute the events, and handle them. So what it is doing is, it is using the event and executing that event. So that is basically done. So, and it is handled. So now I will save this. And I will refresh here, compile, run this. Now, when I run this demo node demo.js, so it have to execute all those because the main connection method is not executed. This connect should execute. So at the last, what we do is event emitter.emit, we have to execute that connect, because connect is the final method, so that contains all the functionality defined. We have to execute that connect method. So that means you have to execute the connect event. So we need to configure the connect event. So we are defining the connect event and specifying the connect event. So it is handling that connect event. Okay. Now when I execute, you can see it has to execute all this. In the first step, connect with MongoDB database. Second, fetch the data from MongoDB database collection. And third, so it should disconnect from the database. Actually, now in these events, we write the functionalities and we define the functionality. But if you want to really communicate with the database in the backend, you need to learn how to connect with the database, interact with the database. So this is another example. Okay. So I will keep this example. Okay. If you want to really connect with MongoDB database, get the data from the database and interact, because already we learned how to create database, how to create tables, how to read, how to update, how to delete. All these operations on MongoDB we discussed. Now we need to connect with that, and I want this node event handler to manage all that. For that, we need some special library to communicate with MongoDB. For example, to communicate with MongoDB, to connect with MongoDB, actually, we need separate MongoDB drivers. Actually, to connect with any database in the backend, you need the relative drivers. For Oracle, you need Oracle drivers. For SQL, you need MySQL drivers. For SQL Server, we need SQL Server drivers. We need to download and install these drivers. Through those drivers, you can connect with the databases, interact with the databases, and manage them. So to install MongoDB drivers, because already our database is in MongoDB, So we created a database and we handle the database. Already you know that what is the database we created in MongoDB? CD program files, CD server, MongoDB. Yeah, MongoDB and CD server, CD 5.0, CD bin, and Mongo, and connection issue, services. Let's start the Mongo server. We created a shopping DB, right? Yeah. So let's start the MongoDB server. Okay, fine. Okay, done. Now let's Mongo. Fine. Now here show DBS. This is shopping DB. Yeah. So use shopping DB and show collections. So we have products, TBL products, that is the collection. So it is having lot of data, TBL categories, TBL products. So db.tbl categories.find.pretty, and it is returning these category names. Okay, some data is there. Okay, let's go now. We want to connect with the MongoDB. Then we have to install with the MongoDB database. So that means how this event handlers can be used to connect and configure. Fetching data and everything I will tell you. So let's see. First we have to install the library. So npm install MongoDB and save. I'm installing the MongoDB drivers. MongoDB is already installed. This is MongoDB drivers. The MongoDB drivers to connect with MongoDB database from Node.js. We have to install MongoDB. So it is installed. We have to download and install the MongoDB in our backend application. This is MongoDB driver and the MongoDB driver. So some problem in this, some error log came. It is related, so connection related issue is there. Connecting with MongoDB, some problem is there. Okay. One more time install. Okay, successful. Sometimes server connecting with the server will fail, internet connections issues. Due to that, it is unable to install. Okay, now it is installed successfully. Okay, fine. Once it is installed successfully, next step, what we have to do. Now here we have to import MongoDB. So where MongoDB is equal to require MongoDB. So we have to import MongoDB. So after that, to connect with MongoDB, you need a connection URL where URL is equal to, MongoDB server connection. Already I told you, MongoDB server connection URL. While connecting, I told you, see, when I type Mongo and enter, it connects to server. Actually, that server URL is HTTP, not HTTP. It is MongoDB:127.0.0.1:270:270:17. That is the MongoDB URL, server URL. So we have to define that URL. You see, when I run this Mongo, it connects with the server. And you see, this is actually the server URL. So this is the server URL. You can see this is the server URL. MongoDB:/127.0.01.27017. That is the server address. So we have to use that URL. Okay. Now in the connect event, we have to connect with the database. So how we can connect with the database? So what we have to do is, here we have to define, say simple, in the event we have to write MongoDB dot, we have a option. So MongoDB actually, we need not entire MongoDB because MongoDB is very huge. We need only client library. So I will write Mongo client. And from the MongoDB library, I will import only Mongo client. Mongo client. That is important. Because MongoDB server library will be there, client library will be there. To connect with the database, we need the client library connecting with the database. So this is Mongo client. And through this Mongo client, you can connect. In the connect event, I am writing Mongo client dot connect. Connect with which URL? You have to define the URL. So it connects with the URL and it uses a callback function inside it. This callback function will return error if it is unable to connect. It will return client object. So through this client object, you can communicate with the database. Here, we are writing a message. If not error, if there is no error, then what we have to do is, so we have to define console.log. We need to display a message, connected successfully. Connected successfully. This message should come. Else, if there is a problem in the connection, console.log, it should display that error. Whatever error is there, it should display. If connection is successful, how to fetch the data, how to interact with the data, I will tell you, we will see that. But this time, what we are doing is, we are really connecting with MongoDB. And we are verifying whether the connection is successful or not. And we are returning if there is any problem. This is how actually we use these events. Similarly, in the fetch event, we have to write logic for fetching data from table. In disconnect, we have to disconnect with it. So, but initially this is enough. We are connecting with the MongoDB database. Really with the MongoDB database, we are connecting. Now you see here, when I run that file, that is node demo.js. This, it says, you see, connected successful. And it is showing connect, observe carefully, the order of events, observe carefully. It is showing connected successfully. And other messages are above this. Why? Because this is what we call as asynchronous approach. That means now tell me here, how many tasks current program have to perform? Tell me how many tasks current program have to perform? How many tasks current program have to perform? 3 tasks have to perform. Can you tell me what are those 3 tasks? What are those 3 tasks? So one is connecting, fetching, and disconnecting. Good, good. Can you tell me in these 3 tasks, according to current program, which is the task that takes more time. According to the program, according to the current program, which tasks will take more time? Connect task will take more time. Why? Because fetch and disconnect are simply messages, na? Only console log one message we are displaying. That is very lightweight task. So which is the heavy task? So it is heavy task is nothing but the heavy task is this connection is the heavy task. Now, as per the concept of Node.js, because Node.js uses asynchronous technique. So we have three tasks. So we have connect, we have fetch, and we have disconnect. These are the three tasks. Now, what happened actually? It will send a request to the first task. It is taking time because it should connect with the database and get response from the server. It will take time. So it is not waiting. It will go to the second task. It will go to the third task. And these two tasks are lightweight. They are ready. So those two tasks displayed immediately. And last connection is successful. Then it displays this task. That means this task is executed as the last task. This is last response, but that is the first request. So this is the second request, and this is the third request. But response can be both at a time. Both at a time can respond because of their lightweight feature. This mechanism of not waiting for the task until it is finished and automatically go to the next task and perform that operation. This mechanism is called asynchronous. So asynchronous technique this is the asynchronous approach it follows. So asynchronous technique advantage is it will not wait for the task. It will perform all the tasks simultaneously. And whichever the lightweight task is there, it comes to you. That is the reason you can see that. So this fetch data is displayed first. Disconnect is displayed, and connection successfully is at the end. It is at the end. That's how it is going to manage your information. Now, another point is, if connected successfully, then we want to fetch the data, interact with the data. So here, for that connecting with the database, we need this MongoDB driver. We have to install the MongoDB driver. We need the URL. If there is any problem in this database connection, it will report that. For example, suppose, see, connected successfully, it is showing it. But due to any technical reason, so Mongo server is not responding. Obviously, suppose you see the MongoDB server, I stopped the server. That means MongoDB server is not running. Now I will run this program again, node demo.js. Then it says fetching data and MongoDB connection and disconnect from MongoDB database. And there is a problem in the connection. And due to that, it connected successfully. We have to write error handling to report the errors also, to configure the error, report the errors, and display the errors also. So the connection successfully is, see, it shows the message. It waited so much time, it tested. After testing, finally, it got a message, connection refused. After connection refused, it says that it is unable to connect with the database. And it will get the entire error report and display. So that means it is unable to connect. So, and it shows the problem. What is the problem? That means, so it is unable to connect with this particular URL. Connection refused from that particular URL. It will get that message and display. So that means small tasks are performed immediately. But any lengthy task, then it have to wait. It have to wait. That's what generally the concept of event. Now, if it is successful, that means suppose I am starting it, start. I am starting the server. That means now it is accepting. Now let's compile this program again. So node demo.js, it is going to execute that. It says connected successful. And it is showing that message. Now, actually, the other operations also we can write. But to write other operations, you should know how to read the data from database, return the data coming from database, how to present the data. All such things we have to understand. Actually, in this, I given just a simple MongoDB connection. So that means MongoDB connection. So how MongoDB connection works? So you have to install so MongoDB drivers to communicate with MongoDB database to communicate with MongoDB database. So how you install that? So npm install so MongoDB and save. And after installing the MongoDB drivers, actually MongoDB requires communication with the database. So we have to import. So you have to import. Let's see that. So we have to import. So you have to import Mongo client library. You have to import the Mongo client module to connect with database. So how we do that usually? So we need to use var and Mongo client is equal to require so MongoDB dot Mongo client. Mongo client is the class, and then you can connect with MongoDB server. For that, what you have to do? We have to define so Mongo client dot connect the URL. I maintain the URL separately, or I can directly define the URL here. That is MongoDB :127.0.0.1 That's how we need to connect with it. This is connection. Now, after connecting, how to read, how to fetch, how to interact, we have to learn. Actually, so this is just only connecting. So connected successfully. After connecting successfully, we need to fetch, we need to access, and we need to use it. For that, a lot of other points are there we will discuss. But this is one basic example up to connect. How do we fetch? How we can handle the data? I will show you. We will see that. But initially, this is the example. So this is an example. So this is demo.js. And this is the program. We don't need, in one event, we can perform all the functionalities. That means after connecting successfully, suppose I am not using the other fetch and disconnect. I am not using any fetch and disconnect, just only the connect. If the connection is successful, here what you can do is, no need to write the message connected successfully. We can use this client object. We can access the data and we can interact with the database. Actually, what we can do here is, if successful, this in this if condition, if it is not having any error, we will use a database object, DBO, database object. By using client object, DB method, we can access a database, shopping DB. This is the database. You know, MongoDB have a DB method. Through that, we can access the database. This client object connects with the server, gets the data database shopping DB. Now, through DBO, database object, we can access the collection. What is the collection name? TBL categories. That is the categories. That is the collection. That means in that collection, we have to execute the command .find. This find command returns all the details. Empty query, it is returning all the details. Or you don't need to write that, just find is enough. Now, it will return all the data, which we will convert into toArray. toArray uses a callback function. This converts this data into array, whatever data comes. And it returns an error and it returns documents. That means if there is a problem in reading data from this table, it will return error. If no error, there is no error, then all the documents inside this TBL categories are stored in these documents. We have to print them. That means console.log, we have to print documents. Whatever documents are returned, we have to print. If there is a problem in reading the table, then console.log, it should report that problem. This is one event which is connecting, which is fetching, and which is returning the data. Everything is managed by one method, one event. Now here, I'm running this. So node demo.js. So it connects, it gets the data and display. That's working fine. That means now your program is successful. When you run this program, it is connecting with the database, fetching the data from the database and returning the data. This is from the categories table. It is fetching the data and displaying. So that means you return a node event called connect, which connects with database, gets the data from the database and returns the data. Depending on what kind of database you are dealing, what kind of database you are working with, you need to understand. So that is the approach. If it is SQL based, then you have to write SQL commands like select star from table and the return data we have to present. So that also I will show you in next point level we will discuss. But this is basically how the events are defined in a node environment to communicate with the database, get the data from the database and interact. You can use these for inserting records, updating records, deleting records, performing various types of operations on the database. This is just not reading. Inserting, updating, all such things also we can do. Another example, we will see how we can perform that operation. So this is communicating with the database, getting the data from the database and interact and displaying the data. So this is example of fetching data from MongoDB database, data from MongoDB database. And for that, this is the logic we have to do. That's the logic we have to configure. How we can fetch and how we can interact with the data. Now it can be any table. So for example, this is TBL products now. I just changed a TBL products table and we will compile this. So we will compile that. So node demo.js, it gets the data from products table. Products table contains lot of data. 20 records are there. It is going to show all the 20. But in the later stage, we will send through browser in the form of JSON object. And our client-side technologies will receive the data and they can start using this data. So you can interact with any table. You can configure with any table. This is a simple example for that. And this is event, how it is returning and handling. This is all comes under the category of event looping. So, and event handling. In Node, how events are used for handling various interactions. Next, once you know how the events are handled and configured, now we need to know about buffers and how we can use with streams. What is a stream? What is a buffer? How the streams and buffers work, because they are important in reading the data and presenting the data. What are buffers and streams? How they are used. Then once you know these buffers and streams, now we can learn how to really send the data to the client side. For that, we need a concept Express now. Express is just a middleware. So it's a very simple middleware. And this middleware is required to send data to the client side. Once you know how buffer and stream works, now through Express, we send this to the client side so that client side they can consume and interact. That we will see in the next session. Tomorrow, we will discuss about that, okay? In tomorrow's session, we will see how buffer stream